says is still without power.
I don't wish this to my worst enemy. There's been so many people that died.
Tonight, Whitefish Energy, the tiny Montana company awarded the largest contract to rebuild the island's decimated power grid, is under fire. San Juan's mayor questioning the transparency around the $300 million deal. The company initially asking, "Do you want us to send our workers back or keep working?" It later apologized and reaffirmed its commitment to Puerto Rico. Whitefish insists its ability to mobilize quickly and perform highly specialized work got the company the job. It now has more than 300 contractors like Bob Burton on the island.
The terrain and the logistics of moving things around. The terrain is extremely difficult here.
Whitefish, Montana is the hometown of U.S. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, though his office says he had nothing to do with the contract. A founding partner of a private equity firm that finances Whitefish donated thousands of dollars to the Trump campaign. Top Democrats now demanding an investigation as they ask for more federal aid.
That this next bill will be very, very substantial, not at the mercy of cronyism and incompetence, as I believe the Whitefish contract was.
Today, Puerto Rico's Financial Oversight Board said it would appoint an emergency manager to oversee the bankrupt power utility which approved the Whitefish contract.
I don't have an objection to a collaboration. I do have an objection to a takeover.
The governor is calling that appointment a case of federal overreach. About 3/4 of this island remains in the dark. The death toll here is up to 51, including 2 more cases of a rare bacterial disease.
Yeah, and that last part by Gabe Gutierrez, who was the NBC News reporter who did that report back on October 27, 2017. You really see how this is slipped out of the media. Like, that's the last part. I mean, Ricardo Rossello does not have any business really objecting to someone something where the government tries to step in and manage their people after they have failed so miserably to get the job done on their own. So I mean, no shit. Whitefish is gonna have to step in here because it's getting to a point where enough is enough. So with that, PREPA placed its chips in a tiny company with hardly any full-time employees. As we know, it's hired more than 300 contractors, and the political brouhaha ignited by Whitefish hiring vastly complicated matters made things less easy, less simple, less streamlined, and took away from the most important thing, which is getting Puerto Rico back on the grid here. Yeah, so Ricardo Ramos, PREPA's director at the time, has made a series of disparate statements about why the authority did not invoke mutual aid. It was always my intention to call upon them, Ramos said in a recent interview, but you have not called upon them. So it just doesn't seem to be like that at all. Until they receive reimbursement from FEMA, utilities often pay for things like workers' food and housing via mutual aid. In October, Ramos told the New York Times he has not wanted to exhaust PREPA's emergency funds, paying for mutual aid groups while waiting for reimbursement. Trump declared that FEMA would provide full reimbursement for emergency work in Puerto Rico. Whitefish, though, said it was not requiring payment up front. Ramos also said, I do not get why that would work, though. I mean, if you're so worried about your funds, you probably would want to have some payment up front just to bring them back to normal here. And if this is probably pretty much the biggest emergency you could possibly have that I can think of, other than your island literally sinking into the ocean. That would be a pretty big emergency. But your island being ravaged by a hurricane, however many months later, you've done absolutely nothing to fix it. There has been some improvements, obviously. I mean, I shouldn't say nothing. But, I mean, there has been major problems to the grid exposed by this, I think would be a fair statement. And there is very little. You seem to be actively standing in the way of the recovery here. Like, you gotta help out. So, whatever was said or done or not said or not done, the overlapping duties without the experienced utilities, that the biggest thing was they here did not call for mutual aid from other places that needed from other places like the government that are usually done at times like these, that even the U.S. Virgin Islands did pretty much immediately. it seemed to be a prescription for the chaos. That, like, the not calling, that just doesn't seem to be why that's happening. We just don't know what is going on. Going with whitefish instead of the mutual aid option seemed to be a really big problem. So FEMA, while this whole situation was going on, enlisted the Army Corps. They gave him a task that it was kind of routine for them. They bring in emergency generators for hospitals, clinics, town centers, and other facilities. I mean, these measures were carried out relatively successfully, but the Corps had never repaired an electrical power grid of this magnitude as part of a service response, said its commander, Todd Semonite, who was a lieutenant general. Although it had placed a small contingent in Puerto Rico before Maria to assess eventual damage, he said the Corps cannot predict the assignment to restore the grid. So they were a little surprised, and it was not something that seemed to be normal at all to observers, really, by any stretch of the imagination. So, yeah, PREPA's director, I mean, geez, there's nothing really what to do. So chaos continued to reign. PREPA was trying to manage the overall restoration process, Miller said, and things just did not really work out so well. They would work on a line and not finish it. The authority, he added, had the appearance of not knowing what was going on, but jumping from point to point, putting out spot fires, so to speak. They weren't really doing an effective job of managing the situation, getting the job done, doing actually what they were supposed to, what they were brought in to do. We spent the 5 or 6 days just scrambling to get gas, Gonzalez said. Mr. Gonzalez said, who is one of the main people who was working and leading the efforts. And it just got to a point where it was a battle, he said, every day. And he had to also make special raises for his employees, go all out of that, and just really not working. Angel Figueroa Yaramillo, who's the president of the Electrical Industry and Irrigation Workers Union, said he found rudderless teams of PREPA workers waiting for orders. There was no work, he said. The men were standing outside for 2 days waiting to find out what to do. Mr. Higgins, who's, as we know, the new PREPA chief, said PREPA has an emergency plan and employees know it. Once the storm has passed and communications were established, every effort was made to make the best use possible of every person. For its part, the Army Corps moved swiftly as federal regulations allowed, according to its general. But after invoking emergency measures to speed the effort, it was not until October 19th that the Corps awarded its second of 2 major restoration contracts. The contractors, in turn, had to scout the damage before it could work again. So, they just still had to make do with what they had. By February, crews with the Corps' main contractor, Fluor, that's what seemed to be going on at the minute. And yeah, so pretty much the point is Fluor was the contractor the Army Corps of Engineers decided to put in there. So Fluor has defended its work, but they have been returning home amid criticism. In some quarters, the work had gone pretty sluggishly, but that is a little bit of a problem. Roseo, especially to Ricardo Roseo, who's the governor, said the Corps' bureaucracy was all but immovable in an emergency that demanded quick action. They didn't have a sense of urgency because there was always a bureaucratic excuse for one thing or another. Bureaucracy, again, seems to be another big theme in this whole mess. In his communications with mayors, Torres, the retired storm czar, who became the governor's lieutenant, said delayed deliveries of millions of parts, the Pentagon's responsibility, often slowed power restoration in those desperate communities. Catalina Carrasco, a spokeswoman for the Army Corps, said she was aware of the governor's concerns, adding that the Corps had made clear from the start that the effort would be lengthy because of the extent of damage caused by the 2 hurricanes, the challenges of the terrain, and the state of the grid system before the storm, and long-distance restoration material must travel to the island. So, I mean, pretty much what we know so far is a bunch of bureaucrats in a major mess right here, and the work was further complicated by the strictures of federal law and the restrictions caused by that. The Stafford Act, which governs FEMA reimbursements and how one person pays back for another person, in most cases required rebuilding to pre-disaster specifications. In Puerto Rico, that meant recreating electrical components that gave the impression of a time capsule from the 1950s and 60s, similar to what we talked about with Munoz's great and beautiful electric system. In the sense, the spending in place was summed up by the experience of 20 workers from Lakeland, Florida, hired as subcontractors by Whitefish. The workers arrived expecting to pick up their trucks, which had left Florida 10 days earlier. Every morning I waited for the call to pick up the trucks. Charlie Russell, the Lakeland electric supervisor on the ground, wrote to his bosses. He waited and waited. Puerto Rico's damaged ports shut down after the storm were now being jammed with a backlog of containers. I mean, they got hit so hard their ports couldn't receive their aid they were trying to get. Yeah, so he waited and waited, and Russell asked his hotel for the location of PREPA's offices, where he thought he might get some answers. He set out on foot with a Spanish-speaking coworker to a district office 2 miles away. They found it, but security guards would not let them in. They tried again the next day. Eventually found a PREPA supervisor, but he had no task at all for the 10 subcontractors hired by Whitefish. So it seems like almost everyone here has some kind of culpability in this situation. And there is, at one point or another, you can find an instance where, whether it be the Army Corps of Engineers, they had a bureaucratic mess. PREPA had a bureaucratic mess. A moment of extreme incompetence or whatever, just not doing the thing they should have been doing. Whitefish had some competency problems as well. Everything seemed to be so bureaucratically jammed, and that's why sometimes the people are just taking matters into their own hands. And that's what they feel like they need to do to get power back, and it just seems that's pretty much what will be going on, unfortunately, for the future. It doesn't really have to be where people have to, and especially in rural areas, have to come together on kind of a community gathering just to do their laundry in a big bus because there's no power left. There has to be some sort of way we can streamline this situation. And it just seems like again and again, in the end, there is just a bunch of major problems. In the end, Lakeland was in Puerto Rico for 22 days. The crew did repair work for 2.5. The bill, which taxpayers will probably foot $820,271, and 25 cents. As time is slipping away, people are now settling into new routines without electricity. In the hills above downtown San Lorenzo, Silvia Martinez woke up at 3:30 a.m. every workday, heated the water on the gas stove, and carried it to her bathroom in a pot so she could shower, using a plastic cup before her long commute to San Juan. Her developed affection for an easy-to-make meals of cheese whiz and crackers. Mildoel Rodriguez, who is disabled, relies on candles to settle as the dusk settled in among the dizzyingly steep hills in the outskirts of Calle. In Humacao in the east, Luz Rivera conducted Bible study classes with her friends by flashlights. So, I mean, people are still adapting to this months and months and months after they originally lost the power. And meanwhile, there just seems to be no end to the government bureaucracy, the lack of streamlining, the kind of corruption in PREPA, and the mismanagement by the Army Corps, the not hiring the right people, the not requesting mutual aid. There just seems to be a major just dropping the ball, and for once, everyone is responsible. There's also this kind of strange story that happened where Rossello and his people met up with Cuomo and his people, and Cuomo urged Rossello and his colleagues to invoke mutual aid, as we talked about. For Rossello, a professor of biomedical engineering who had taken the office just a few months before, this was a case of first impression, Cuomo explained. They say, okay, one question. What's the request for mutual aid? Then, using Sandy as an example, the head of the New York Power Authority, Gil Quinones, I doubt I'm saying that name right, apologize Gill, laid out how Long Island Power